Hello, I'm Steve Hassan, and I'm honored to have with me psychiatrist James Fleming. And Dr. Fleming contributed to this volume, which is actually getting some kudos around the world because he wrote a chapter in it, as did I actually, and it was on an email list that we connected with each other and
Exactly.
chatted before on Zoom. And I was especially, well, let's start with your chapter and what you were writing in here, if I may, and then we'll go and talk about Donald Trump and the Goldwater Rule, which is phase two of our chat today, Jim.
Well, I was approached in an email by Steve Moffick, who is the main editor, the kind of the energy behind the that book, Anti-Semitism in Psychiatry, which you probably know is a follow-up to anti-Semit or to Islamophobia in psychiatry.
Yes.
But so I thought, well, I've got an article that was published that I can just go from that, and so I sent that to him. He said, "Yeah, this is good. It should the chapter should be a little longer," and it turned out to be quite a project. And the editors responded right away. My title of my chapter, which is at the very end of the book, not the last chapter, but it's one of the last three or four, was the role of psychiatry and psychiatrists in addressing stemming the tide of rising tide of anti-Semitism. And there's a connection to the current president, soon to be past president of the United States of America. In
Yeah,
that, in that,
absolutely. Yeah, my chapter was explicitly about hate groups that turn people to become anti-Semitic, and I was honored to be contribute a chapter in the Islamophobia
right.
volume that preceded it. But I myself, coming from a conservative Jewish upbringing, when I was recruited into the Moon cult, where Moon said he was the Messiah, was preaching essentially the Jews lost their blessing from God. And later in the
Oh,
inner doctrines, they were saying that the Holocaust was necessary because the Jews didn't
oh,
accept Jesus.
wow.
But most Moonies did not hear that, but that was up in the apex.
Sure.
So I wrote a chapter about how people can be socially influenced to
Mm,
adopt these anti-Semitic,
mm, mm.
Islamophobic beliefs, essentially.
Right,
So that was
right.
my angle on this. But please, let's jump into. I mentioned to you that have interviewed Bandy Lee a couple of times, who edited this fine volume.
Right.
It came out, the best-selling New York Times best-selling books. The first one, I think, had 27 experts. This one has 37.
Oh,
But she has experienced great censorship, for lack of a better word, in the
mhm.
media because of citing the Goldwater Rule. And even though she said quite clearly she is an expert on dangerousness
Mm.
and she's not diagnosing, she's saying these behaviors are dangerous and therefore
Right,
this person
right.
is dangerous.
Yeah.
So you're a lifetime member of the American Psychiatric Association, literally the premier mental health medical institution, and its position with the Goldwater Rule is what I would like to hear your thoughts about today.
Well, we should basically give a brief history. The name comes from, first of all, it's not a rule. It's in the
Thank
ethics
you.
code, but which are not rules. They're not rigid laws or rules. They're guidelines. But it made its way into the APA's annotations to the AMA's Principles of Medical Ethics 9 years after Barry Goldwater was running for president. And he was a little different. He was a little kind of extreme in the view of many people, including, I think, Atlantic Magazine, which had never endorsed a candidate or condemned a candidate before and did. And then the second time was in 2016 when Donald Trump ran.
Uh-huh.
But the way it started was, very briefly, a magazine now defunct called Fact Magazine, F-A-C-T, was able to get the mailing list for psychiatrists through the AMA, the American Medical Association. And they sent out surveys asking psychiatrists if they thought Donald Trump was fit to be president. And there may have been a question about, his mental illness or mental fitness was certainly part of it. And actually a minority of psychiatrists responded. Many just probably threw it in the trash, thought this is ridiculous, or maybe didn't even look at it. I think my recollection was maybe 20, 30%, okay? But a lot of them had sort of wild armchair psychiatric diagnoses with a lot of psychoanalytic language, which was the theory that we operated under at the time back in 1964. There wasn't a lot of medications available back then, or treatments other than, psychodynamic and psychotherapy, and a few other, biologic treatments, which were not all that effective and were often dangerous. But so it was really pretty inappropriate what a lot of psychiatrists wrote. And so it created a big public backlash. Barry Goldwater also successfully sued Fact Magazine and won a pretty good reward for libel, but $1 of damages, personal damages, were awarded, which is basically saying, okay, fine, but we're not going to give you any money for that. The APA didn't deal with it until it was time for them to start thinking about other ethical issues which were going on at the time that were sort of unique to psychiatry that didn't seem to be covered by the AMA's code. So they came up with these annotations, especially applicable to psychiatry. So if you look on the APA website, www.psych.org, you'll see under, scroll down. We're
going to add a link in our blog.
Okay, you'll see it under ethics. You'll see the ethical principles of medical ethics with annotations, especially applicable to psychiatry. So it turns out there's I don't remember if there's 7. There may be 9. I don't remember exactly how many main groups are, but 7 has to do with physicians having a responsibility to engage in activities that help the public good, basically. Mm-hmm. Well, it's sort of curious that, and it's sort of ironic that the Goldwater rule ended up, which is not called the Goldwater rule, it's called just section 7.3, which is an annotation to 7, which again states that physicians, including psychiatrists, which are medical doctors, MDs or DOs, have an ethical obligation, not just to take care of their patients and, have an ethical practice and all that, but to actually engage in activities that help society. So what it says is that we are not to render a professional opinion about those who may be in the public mind or the public sphere. In other words, public figures, particularly presidential candidates, or maybe your senator who's acting kind of in a bizarre way, or something like that, okay? That it is unethical for a psychiatrist to do that. And what's ironic is that Bandy Lee, in writing, and many of the other authors in her book, felt that they were doing that. They were meeting the general section 7 by saying, this person who's running for president and who has now later become president, really is potentially a very dangerous person to be leading our country and have a finger on have the nuclear codes. I mean, that is a scary proposition. So that's kind of where, and I have concerns about, certainly there are boundary violations that are very serious in mental health. When a therapist or a psychiatrist or a physician, a gynecologist, let's say, takes advantage of their power over the patient, the uneven relationship, and abuses that power, that is horrible. It's very damaging to patients. When a police officer who has a lot of power and lethal weaponry can take someone's life and acts impulsively, horrible consequences. But we're not talking about a patient when we're talking about rendering a professional opinion. So that's where the concern of a lot of people comes in. This is not really in the same league as other ethical questions. Let's say that. Mm-hmm. And there's more. There was a number of defenses since 1973 when the quote unquote Goldwater rule, i.e. section 7.3 of the ethics code, was put on paper. There's been a lot of kind of bringing that up from time to time, but nothing like 2015 and 2016. And the APA was getting lots of calls from members and emails and from the public saying, hey, what's going on? What's this Goldwater? I mean, it's obvious this is some serious behavior that this person's engaging in. And it seems to be, something that psychiatrists should be able to comment on. Other people were concerned that psychiatrists were commenting on it. They shouldn't be because of the Goldwater rule. And so they asked the ethics committee, or I think the ethics committee of the APA, which is an appointed committee. All the committees are appointed by the president, and then they rotate every couple of years. So there's always new members coming in they have a fresh crop. So there may be some of the same people aren't even there. But March of 2017, which would have been a couple of months after Trump was inaugurated for his one and only term. Sorry.
Fortunately.
Thank you, God. And I say that sincerely. I'm a faithful person, and a lot of people had a lot of angst and were very grateful that Mr. Trump is not going to get a second term. But so he had been inaugurated a couple months before, and this famous or infamous March 2017 opinion of the ethics committee was brought out by the APA and put on press releases, and the president of the APA at the time said this was unethical back in 1964. And even though we didn't comment on it until 1973,
right.
And it's still unethical for psychiatrists to render opinion. But what the March opinion did was it gave this definition of a professional opinion that was so encompassing that I think Mary Trump, who I think you mentioned,
psychologist and
came out. Donald Trump's niece came out and talked about this opinion. She said it's barely coherent. It's coherent. It's logical, but it expands the definition of professional opinion such that it claims that psychiatry seems to have a corner on the market for words like speech, affect, behavior. Really? I mean, I think when I was in middle school, I probably knew what speech, maybe not affect, probably not. I don't think I knew about affect, really what that was until my residency, but it wasn't used, but emotions, behavior. Right. And certainly high school, college, people in other professions would use those terms, and we are also private citizens. Anyway, the bottom line is there was a number of logical threads in that opinion that basically, if you look at them all together, they kind of make sense and you can follow the logic of each one. But taken as a whole, it gives the impression that they did not want, the ethics committee did not, they knew what the leadership of the APA wanted. They did not, the ethics committee and the leadership did not want psychiatrists speaking out because there may be more, not only embarrassment, but the APA leadership was very aware, and the ethics committee and many others were very aware of the vindictiveness of this person, the power of someone who is vindictive, who will attack his enemies relentlessly. Even people who have been former supporters who are no longer maybe as supportive can be attacked. So and
possibly the pharmaceutical industry pressure through people on that, maybe.
I don't know. I think there's less of that now. The APA had to really separate themselves a number of years ago, thanks to largely to Congress, particularly someone that I don't ordinarily support, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, who basically, I think, said physicians are getting too much money from drug companies. And so we don't see much advertising anymore. You can't get continuing education at the annual meeting anymore for drug company
Well,
sponsored.
that's good to hear. I didn't actually
Yeah.
know that, Jim.
Yeah. So I think that's less of an issue, Steve,
Okay.
but I think the possibility that there could be massive retaliation against really legitimate things that the APA does. Excellent government relations branch. They have a political action committee, which I have some issues with because they contribute to people that I would never consider contributing myself. So I'm kind of stingy. I wait till after the election. But so things that could really affect patients, especially seriously mentally ill patients, in terms of mental health parity, for insurance payments, discriminatory things. But,
But
so
if I may, coming back to Trump,
yeah,
who
sure.
famously said, I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and people will still follow me.
Still
For
vote for me.
somebody like Bandy Lee, who teaches at Yale Law School and whose
Right.
expert is dangerousness, who is called on professionally all the time
Right.
without needing people, can hear something like that and say,
right.
this is not something that any normal person would ever say, much less starting to add multiple behaviors together, like his pathological lying.
And for a political leader, I think he was still hadn't won the election then yet. Yes, or maybe
I'm not sure. I think it was before he was actually formally elected.
But for someone, and then other things that Trump has said after being elected, for someone to say the things he said in that position, wow, that is has much more impact. It's much more impact for the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world to say some of the things that he has said.
And he just pardoned people who were convicted of murdering civilians in Iraq. So there's many more behaviors that are concerning. But to cut to the chase, if I may, Jim, the APA pretty much sent a chilling message to all the major television networks and all of the print media. You can't quote psychiatrists who are commenting on Donald Trump's dangerousness. And it really shut down freedom of speech, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting. I would be very interested to hear some data on that, because I am interested in talking with a group of psychiatrists and mental health professionals that you work with, psychiatry and the law group, about revisiting the March 2017 opinion, and the fact that there's actually a fatal flaw that I discovered after reading that many times over the years. Just before the election, a few weeks before the election, where they were trying to defend the charge. The March 2017 opinion basically dealt with all the objections to the Goldwater rule, including what Bandy Lee does. Well, forensic psychiatrists, they render opinions on criminals or people who are, under dangerous, who are in criminal justice settings, and so they basically shoot that down, saying, "Well, but that's officially sanctioned, and we're talking something different here." But one of the objections was that the Goldwater rule suppresses freedom of speech. They said, "Well, no, not really, because psychiatrists are citizens and they can speak as citizens." But there's a euphemistic substitution where, because they had defined a professional opinion so broadly to include even the word behavior, they said we can observe behavior when trying to defend against the charge of suppressing individual speech by psychiatrists as private citizens. We can observe behavior and we can comment on actions. If they had said we can observe behavior and comment on it, then they would have been violating their own rule about what constitutes a professional opinion, which is this huge, broad net which captures every possible word related to subjective and objective human functioning, which is ridiculous.
And may I also add, if I may, Jim, that Bandy Lee was just saying, let's get a bipartisan group a forensic psychiatrist
Okay.
together and do a formal evaluation. If there's this level of concern for our nation, for our American people, let's get a whole bunch of conservatives and a whole bunch of liberals and everybody
Okay.
in between, and let's do an actual assessment on the president. And that seemed to be ridiculously off bounds too. But I think in the future we're going to need to have something in law for this.
So let me ask: was she suggesting an in-person interview, or was she suggesting, based on the mounds of data, and Mary Trump has brought this out too, there is so much data, behavioral data on Donald Trump, much more than one would gather in an in-person session with someone.
My recollection, Jim, is that over time it's morphed to the point where she said, we don't need to meet him in
Don't need it.
person.
Okay, but initially
But
she
prior to that, she was
okay.
just saying, look,
Oh,
this is my expertise. I'm seeing things that are very worrisome.
right.
Let's make sure that the most powerful person on planet Earth is sane and functional.
Exactly.
And
So
but the APA was used to shut that down.
well, here's what's ironic about that and why I asked. Because Jeffrey Lieberman, past president of the APA, came out and, by the way, commented on some, while trying to defend the Goldwater rule, and I think referred to Bandy Lee as an undistinguished or indistinguished professor, which is kind of a real sort of slam, and I think a violation of some other aspects of professionalism, if not in the ethics code. You don't slam your colleagues. Sorry, Jeffrey, but I'm calling you out here, buddy. If you're listening, you're a good doc, and thank you for all your work on Clozaril, which has saved a lot of patients. But I have to say it, you were off base there, Dr. Lieberman. He called for an official commission or official process in U.S. government to evaluate people like Donald Trump, to evaluate presidents when there's some question about fitness. So he called for that while defending the Goldwater rule and also violating it by using terms related to Trump's behavior. So anyway.
I don't know. I'm much more interested in the future and what we can do to save the country.
I think that, I mean, Trump got away with so much in terms of, the phone call to, that was recorded regarding Ukraine, which triggered off the impeachment hearing, which I just was reminded today, triggered a process which the Democrats had no interest in pursuing. It wasn't because they were trying to reverse the results of the 2016 election, like many Republicans have been trying to do with the 2020 election. It wasn't. It was because of this horrendously unpatriotic and treasonous behavior. And look what happened. My Senator Roy Blunt, who does some good things and is able to work in a more bipartisan way with others, basically on his Facebook page during the impeachment proceedings, oh, this is a political thing, just a political. And I said, really? Senator Blunt, you can do better than that.
Yeah.
I hope you're listening to this too, Senator Blunt. I'll send you a copy of it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we have been shown all of the assumptions of good behavior when somebody, becomes president, and the fact that these assumptions need to be now bound in law for the protection of our republic, because what was being done was just, immoral, criminal in many cases. Back to you.
Well, Steve, yeah, immoral, criminal, and insane, I would say. I mean, just bizarre, I think it was Louis Black, the comedian, the dark comedy comedian Louis Black. He said, "You can't make this stuff up. This would be funny if it wasn't true. You can't. I couldn't come up with this stuff." And it is bizarre every day. I mean, I think a lot of Americans are going to look forward. They're going to realize what they have been putting up with for 4 years. But let me if I can pivot a little bit from what you said about bringing something into law. And I know you're working on some initiatives that I think would have some legislative impact regarding undue influence on people.
Yeah, that's my work is
Right.
trying to help people.
But I think that, I think there could be some legislative initiatives eventually, but I think the landscape now is sort of like we're still in the war that the race war that Trump has started, the culture war that Trump has started. He was able to speak to some dark parts of a lot of people who were sleeping, who are maybe not even voting. Okay, he probably wouldn't have won 2016 without a lot of disaffected Bernie Sanders supporters. Maybe he would have.
I would also say that in my research for the Cult of Trump book, the Tea Party, the Rush Limbaughs, the Alex Joneses have been working on inciting
Sure.
disinformation,
Right, you're right.
propaganda, racist stuff way before Trump came into power.
But he plugged into that.
Absolutely. So, and that's my thesis in my book is
Right.
he's a symptom
Right.
of
Yeah.
decades of bad,
Exactly.
corrupt legislation and infiltration and corruption of money.
And by the way, I don't have a problem mentioning to whoever might be listening that it really is worthwhile listening to Steve read his own book, to you read your own book.
Thank you.
Really quite good. I was amazed at the number of references and the connections I didn't know about.
No.
And really quite good. And it's the kind of book that after listening to it, there's so many points where I wanted to follow up with references that I'll have to get the hard copy so that I don't have to go back and try to find the audio part.
Great.
Yeah, it's really quite worthwhile to make those connections. But so I think what has happened is somebody said, you can't put the cork back on the bottle for what has happened. I mean, what was it? I think was it before the election that before the election that some Michigan militia type members came to the Capitol armed to the teeth with camo and mask, kind of masked up so they couldn't be identified, ready to kidnap the governor.
Yeah, the FBI did a stellar job to
They
out
did a great
that.
job. They planted somebody who was wearing a wire, and even though the group was pretty tight with security and had taken everybody's cell phones, maybe didn't think that someone would wear a wire, didn't know that wires could be as small as they are. But in any case, that was a symptom of how bad things have gotten. And then I saw a statistic just last week. It may have been in Nation magazine, I don't remember. 70% of polled Republicans still believe, this was recent in the last couple of weeks, that Trump actually won the election, not Biden. 70%.
Yeah. And yesterday, just for historical place marker, the van blew up in Nashville, Tennessee. And there is calls by General Flynn for armed revolution and martial law declarations. So we're not out of the woods till January 20th and after that. But I do believe a lot of people are going to start waking up to the fact that they were conned and lied to by Donald Trump about the election.
I hope you're right. I think you're right. And I think that as time goes on, more and more people will wake up, and more people who are in office are going to have to face the longer term memory that many of us have than the kind of short term memory that the media and the Trump campaign have been trying to promote. When there's so much chaos, I mean, I think that's part of the strategy is create chaos. Yep. So that people are like, oh, and then you forget how all the crazy things that were said and the extreme things that were said, because there's a new set of them that are kind of in a different area, in a different field, you know?
Yeah. I like the term fire hose of propaganda. Mm-hmm. That term is very much Putin's methodology, and Trump is using Putin's methodology. But if I can cut to the chase, Jim, what what would you do to make it so that the APA upholds their duty to warn and to be concerned about the public, but also protect, mental health and not stigmatize people who, and that's another point that you made in your letter, your open letter to Mary Trump, about one of the objections from the board of the APA was somehow it was going to stigmatize mental health. But what would you, if you had your bully, pulpit, not bully pulpit, but your bullhorn, that's a better term.
Like if I
what
was,
would you recommend?
If I was the president of the APA.
or that, that the membership could proceed. I mean, I know personally quite a few psychiatrists who've left the APA over the silencing of Bandy Lee and all the other eminent psychiatrists.
Well, I am not hopeful. And right now I've been the chair of the the caucus in the APA, one of the many caucuses on climate change and mental health. And we just got approval by the president, Jeff Geller, who wrote a letter responding to Mary Trump's open letter to psychiatrists, saying basically, you need to forget about the Goldwater rule. Anyway, I was very disappointed in his letter, but I was glad that Jeff Geller, who's a supporter of climate change advocacy by psychiatrists and helped our caucus move forward, that he proposed a committee be formed, which is a much more powerful entity in the APA than a caucus. And so that's going to happen. And we're submitting right now names for him to be considered for him to appoint.
Oh, great.
Committee. So
climate change activists can be in touch with you if they want to try to.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And if they want to make a donation to another group, Climate Psychiatry Alliance was formed the core of our caucus, and they're almost all psychiatrists.
Great.
And it's a nonprofit. But so I don't see that being a priority with the APA right now. But if I had the magic wand, we would revisit. So I was an assembly rep for 5 years, part of the governance body, one of 2 representatives from Missouri. Each state or district branch has at least 2. And New York has, 20. Mm-hmm. But they have multiple district branches in New York City. California has probably 10. Mm-hmm. So they have more representatives. But I was one of 2, and I put forth an action paper, a resolution, which only garnered about 35% of the vote, maybe 30, of the assembly of the 500 members, saying that the APA should revisit the March 2017 opinion. And it was titled something like Public Statements, Guidelines for Public Statements by Psychiatrists. And they really need to flesh that out better. The notion, there needs to be a distinction between commenting about a patient you've seen, and maybe why would a patient you've seen give you permission, release of information to tell people about their mental evaluation? Why would you want to do that? Okay, this isn't but the Goldwater rule is this weird mix of comment about a patient you've never seen or probably never will see, a public figure like the president, saying that you can't comment on anything that is influenced by your training, i.e. this broad definition of a professional opinion, without personally examining the person and then getting a consent. Well, is that going to happen? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous.
So it's a stupid rule. It's not a rule. It's a guideline which shouldn't be in there, but I don't see it going out. They have spent too much ink, too much effort defending it, including Dr. Geller's letter to the Washington Post, which didn't even make it to the APA website from what I could tell. I think they were embarrassed by it. It was a terrible letter. Sorry, Jeff, if you're listening, you're a great guy, but it was a bad letter. It was inappropriate. Mentioned Mary Trump and other critics of the Goldwater rule are weaponizing mental health, and it's reminiscent of Soviet.
And it's not true.
Is reminiscent of Soviet Russia that used mental health against political prisoners. It's like, wait a minute, it's the opposite.
It's the opposite, right?
Who are trying to address what is going on in our government, which is basically a totalitarian, an attempt to be a totalitarian type of governance by someone who adores and admires totalitarian, sometimes brutal leaders like the Korean leader, the Russian leader, and the Turkish leader.
Yeah, no, it sounds like he was projecting, just like Trump and his agents have been, what they were doing onto others. It's just the opposite of what is.
So I have a paper I'd like to propose that your group of forensic psychiatrists and mental health professionals consider writing with me, which will get the attention of people on the grassroots of the AP. It's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. Why didn't somebody point this out?
Right.
Methinks we doth proclaim too much.
Yeah. Protest too much, you mean?
Well, no. It's methinks she doth protest too much is the Shakespearean comment with someone who is, and I have to look up the reference, but a woman who is basically going overboard to present the opposite view of how she really feels. So we were going overboard when we did this. We were proclaiming too much.
Right.
And we were protesting against the critics of the Goldwater rule too much. But I discovered a fatal flaw, that their attempt to create this broad definition of a professional opinion was their downfall, because it basically revealed that that's too much, and they couldn't even use the same words to describe why individual psychiatrists can speak out in the way that Bandy Lee has been, and according to Section 7, which the Goldwater rule is under, should speak out when necessary.
Yeah, obliged to. And we're going to wrap up in a minute, but I also can't help but comment that I know that the CIA and other intelligence agencies hire, forensic psychiatrists and psychologists to evaluate other world leaders to try to get a good take on what they're about and what's going to work and how to make proposals.
That was addressed in the March 2017 opinion and said, yes, but that's official, or that's through, you can using academic standards, standards of academic scholarship, one can comment on historical figures. Well, as soon as somebody becomes the candidate, or even before, for president of the United States, they are now a historical figure. Even if they lose, they're like Barry Goldwater lost. He's an historical figure who we're still talking about today,
100%.
47 years later almost.
Yep. I want to also comment before I let you go just about this assault on experts and assaults on institutions, including democratic institutions. And I can't help but think that there's some, dark arts going on too, to try to besmirch the field of mental health in the United States, to confuse. What do you think? No, yes?
I think it's part of the culture war that Trump plugged into. And, a lot of very brilliant, successful Wall Street types wanted Trump because it was good for the bottom line. And a lot of sincere, I'll just say evangelical, but Christian people, a lot of Jews who care a lot about Israel supported Trump.
Yep.
But a lot of folks who are not very educated and who maybe are feeling left out by society, who can't hardly make a living wage. And even though the Republicans often govern in opposition to their own interests, it felt so good to have somebody like Trump being able to say stuff that they wanted to say. And boy, those experts, screw all these, farmers who are tired of all the environmental laws and industry, too much regulation, get rid of government. Meanwhile, we have chlorpyrifos, which Obama administration finally agreed should be banned. Well, as soon as Trump got in, they said, no, we're not going to ban that. So clear that it's toxic to babies, to infants, to newborns.
So I guess I want to just state categorically my opinion, which is that Trump got information about what would resonate with a lot of
I'm sure he
the
did.
core, and he
Yeah.
lied to them. He
Oh,
said
he
he
lied to
would
them.
drain the
Absolutely.
swamp. He said that he's an outsider. He said he was a very successful businessman, which he is not either. So there's so many, I mean, when I woke up from my trance of being in the Moonies and realized Moon was a liar,
Mm,
and therefore I couldn't trust him, and therefore he
mm,
couldn't be a man of God if he's a
mm,
liar, because the
right.
God that I believe in is a God of truth.
Mm,
That's what started my wheels. But I was fanatical, and that's also why I'm so optimistic. A large amount of Americans are going to wake up going, how did I believe this?
yeah.
I trusted my politicians. I trusted Fox News and other outlets and media outlets, talk radio. I trusted my pastor, who now is dead from COVID-19. They're going
Mm,
to wake up and go,
mm,
wait a minute.
yeah. Some will wake up. Yeah. Let's hope.
Yeah. Any last words as we wrap up, Jim? This has been fantastic. Thank you
Oh,
for.
well, thanks. I feel when I saw that email, Steve Hassan, and that you were your background, I thought, boy, that's one of the chapters in anti-Semitism and psychiatry I haven't read yet, and I had been a little frustrated not getting my open letter published and a couple other things before the election. But so it's great connecting with you, and I look forward to working with you and other people who, really care about our country, who care about truth, who care about justice, who care about our planet. I am inspired, and I found this not through the kind of the liberal Catholic newspaper, National Catholic Reporter, based in my hometown of Kansas City, where I live now. Not my hometown, but where I live now. I heard about this through The Call, which is an African-American paper in Kansas City, been around for decades. Pope Francis's recent book.
I just posted a TED talk that Pope Francis did that was
Yeah.
made me cry. It was so beautiful.
And he addresses, he provides support for the protests after the death of George Floyd. He bemoans the fact that many political leaders, he doesn't mention names, but we know who he's talking about, sound like and he didn't say fascist leaders, but are sounding like the leaders, European leaders in the 1930s.
Yep,
Like
exactly.
Hitler. He didn't.
And the Catholic Church faces a right-wing branch that thinks he's Satan. Like literally, they think that Pope Francis is Satan.
Yeah, there's some scary stuff going on in the Catholic Church. We
Yeah,
have
but we come back to the principles of I am my brother's keeper. Do unto others as you would.
Right. We got to come back to those faith principles. Those are important.
They're essential for our survival.
And they've been around for so long because they're based in truth.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much, Jim Fleming. Continued work, and we'll be in touch for sure in the days to come.
All right.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.